Hello, darling APUS students. So sorry I am not here to teach you guys this in person, but don't worry, it's relatively simple and it's just the basis for everything else we're going to be doing for the rest of the year. So why would I need to be there in person? Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is document analysis. Now, in the AP program, let's switch to the next slide. In the AP program, pretty much every question that you guys have on the exam is about analyzing documents. In fact, the only question that is specifically not about answering a document is the long essay question. Every other question you're going to see, every multiple choice question, the short answer questions, and of course the DBQ is going to be based on looking at documents. So we need to look at really hundreds of documents throughout this class to get comfortable doing it. So that's exactly what we're practicing today. Now let's talk about some skills that you need in order to look at these documents. Then we will look at the document that's been passed out to you, and then we'll talk about how you actually write about a document. Here we go. Okay, so there are two steps that historians use when we look at a document. The very first thing we need to do is look at the document and read it and see what is this even about. So the very first thing you do is look at context clues. For example, what's the document titled? Is it titled the Declaration of Independence? Okay, well, then I might already know something about that. In fact, on a test, I might not even need to read the Declaration because I already have it memorized and tattooed on myself, right? The next thing we look at is the author. So who wrote it? Maybe that might give us a clue as to what the document is about. So if the document is written by some World War II general, well, it's probably about the war. And then finally, the date. When is this document written? So sometimes the author might not give us any hint, and maybe the name won't, but the date might. Oh, hey, this document was written during the Great Depression. They're probably going to talk about something regarding big businesses. That's essentially how this works. So the very first thing that a historian will do is look at the title, the author, and the date. That way, they usually, if they're a good historian, like me, I guess, they might actually know where this is before they even read it. And they already know what they're supposed to get out of it. That's kind of a skill the College Board wants you to have. And then you need to look at the document itself. You need to actually read it and see what's going on here. So you guys have the document in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, by which I mean you're going to pause this video. Give it a read through. There are 3 distinct laws, really 3.5 laws. I want you guys to read each one, and you can circle, underline, or highlight the most important information in there. So what is the most important thing from each of these laws? Okay, so go ahead, pause the video, and you guys go ahead and do that. And when you're ready, resume the video, and I'll go through the document to make sure you got everything right. Okay, we're back. So let's take a look at each act, and I'll show you guys what I highlighted here. Now, these laws are called the Virginia Laws for Blacks, and that is going to be the laws that are written specifically about what do we do with all of these currently way more imported people into the Americas that are being used as laborers. What do we do with them when issues happen? Hence where these laws come from. So the very first question is, well, these slaves are having children. So what happens there? Well, take a look at this first law, 1662. There haven't even been people Europeans in North America all that long. And one of the first laws that's made in the American colonies is going to be Act 12. The idea that children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. The idea being that if your mother is a slave, you are a slave. As I'm sure you guys can guess, what's going to happen here is that many slave masters are going to be, let's see, this is on YouTube, so I have to use proper wordage so it doesn't get taken down. Well, you can fill in the blank, with their slaves, and then those women would become pregnant. The question is this child going to be a slave or non-slave? Especially if the child, when born, maybe looks mixed race. This law says that if your mother is a slave, you are a slave. Okay, let's look at the next one. All right, this act is a little bit longer, but the idea here being that it is not lawful for any slave or really any black person in America, because there are some free blacks in America, even at this time period, are not going to be able to arm themselves with any club, staff, gun, or sword, or any matter of defense or offense. Nor should they be able to depart from their master's ground without a certificate from the master. So what would happen on slave plantations is that if a master needed, I don't know, maybe something picked up from another plantation, they'd give a piece of paper with words written on it that the slave could take to the other plantation. If anyone were to accost them or whatever, they would see the piece of paper and realize they were okay to go where they're going. If they didn't have that piece of paper and were out wandering around, well, they were often to have some of the other things that you've seen in these laws, namely the punishments. Specifically here, 20 lashes on his bare back. Okay, final law. Ooh, this one's a doozy. This is actually a two-parter here. So we have that should any slave resist his master, owner, or other person, and that person chooses to correct or punish such a slave. So for example, let's just say that there's a slave master and a slave escapes or whatever, or maybe they weren't polite enough to them. There's stories of this happening. And the person decides to correct that slave and that slave were to die. Well, guess what? Even if I were to, as a slave master, kill someone else's property in this case, which is what this law is talking about, I shall not be punished for it. So even if the slave that is killed is not my slave in this context, I cannot be punished for it. That's pretty hardcore. And then let's go ahead and look down at this last law. I believe this is law number 36. And also it is hereby enacted and declared that baptism of slaves does not exempt them from bondage. Now, many of these slaves are going to be taught Christianity, and Christianity is going to be very prominent in North America during this time period. But the implication here is clear. Just because there are things that happen in the Bible about freedom, that doesn't mean that your current condition is going to change. This is something we're going to talk about in more detail later. Religion among slaves and the changing of the words of Christianity as a means of keeping slaves enslaved. Okay, so now we have looked at the document. Now what do we do? Okay, so you may have heard this last year in AP World or maybe all the way back in AP Human Geography, but one of the things that we have to do as historians is look at the historical context of the document. You've technically already done this, but what we need to do now is we need to kind of figure out, well, what is going on during the time period this document is written? So I've looked at the author, I've looked at the date, and I've looked at the title of the document, and now I've read the document. What is this document trying to do or achieve? This is the interpretation that historians use when we see a document. It's actually pretty simple to do here. Think of it this way. Look at the document that you guys are listening to right now, right? You're listening to a YouTube lecture. Why? Why are you doing this lesson online? What's the context? Well, Mullen isn't in class on campus because he is recovering from COVID. So you have to learn this lesson a different way. That's the context for why you're doing this lesson the way that you are. Otherwise, this document would never have existed. Make sense? Okay, so using that same thought process here, what you guys are going to do, I want you guys to write a statement about the laws that you guys are looking at right now. So the question is, you have to ask yourself is, why does this document exist? And like, what happened that made a document like this necessary? So your first sentence should be kind of formulaic. It's going to be like this: blank was an issue because blank. And then your second sentence is going to be, how does the document answer that issue? Now, this is something that you guys are going to do dozens of times in this class, but I want you guys to go ahead and try it on your own to see what you come up with. Again, think of any of those laws that you just read, and the question you have to ask yourself is, why does this law exist? So the very first law should be the easiest, right? There are now children running around America that were born here, and they were born by these slaves. The question is, are they slaves or not? That's basically your first sentence. And your second sentence would be a quick summary without quoting it of how the document settled that question. I kind of gave you a spoiler of how to write the first one. But try it for the other ones as well. Pause the video, and then I'll show you guys the quote-unquote answers on the next slide. Okay, so here are two really easy statements that are kind of showing you guys how this skill works. So the first one, as the children of African slaves were born, questions arose as to their status as free or slave. In the first of many slave laws, the Virginia colony government declared all children of slaves to be slaves, period. That should probably say all children of female slaves to be slaves, but that's a little bit more nuanced than we need to get into right now. Or, looking at the final law, as the role of religion grew in the middle colonies, many slaves were taught the teachings of Christianity. However, laws were passed stating that the conversion or baptism into Christianity did not free one from slavery. Now, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to teach you guys how to write essays, and this is essentially exactly what you put in there. If you've taken a DBQ before, maybe in world history, all I'm going to do at the end of that second sentence is just throw in quotation marks, doc 1, and then that's me using that document appropriately. That's essentially all a DBQ is. It's that simple. So we'll practice that more as we go. This is our first looking at document analysis. All right, that's all we're doing today. Bye.